dance. All right. Hello, everybody. I am HP Holo / Edie Skye, and this is Authors Just Talk About. This particular episode is inspired by the fact that whenever I go to conventions to hang out around my author pals, I am routinely the dumbest person in the room because I hang out with so many cool, smart people. And occasionally, I like to get all the smart people together to talk about topics I am interested in. And I know a lot of people who are involved in various space sciences, or in some cases, who can research them so well that they fake them well enough that I actually thought some of them were in I want to say astroscience, but I don't know if that's the right word. Anyway, I thought they were in that area for several years. So until I learned otherwise. So today we are here to talk about space science. Now I'm going to have everyone go down the line, introduce who you are, just author bio and what you've written. And then we'll get to the space science questions. So let's start with Patrick.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. Patrick Chiles. I am not a space scientist. Very much a space enthusiast, and I'm one of those that she talked about who like to do the research, need to do the research enough to, as they say, fake it till you make it. I typically write hard sci-fi, near future, more like techno thriller stuff. I like to call it, Tom Clancy in space. My most recent is not anything like that. Interstellar Medic: The Long Run. It is warp drive and space aliens and kind of a Men in Black vibe. It's a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun with a lot of sci-fi and UFO abduction tropes. My last hard sci-fi book before that was Escape Orbit, which came out last year. Very much hard sci-fi, a lot of research. It took me as long to research it as it did to write it. And that's my story.
All right, Les.
Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm Les Johnson. I'm a physicist. I write popular science and science fiction novels. I'm also, in my day job, I'm the chief technologist at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, which I guess does make me a rocket scientist, technically. I feel kind of like I'm still trying to impersonate one as time goes on. But I've been at NASA for many years, had two projects flying, well, two that I was the lead on fly in space, and I've been a part of other projects. In my writing, my latest nonfiction book is called A Traveler's Guide to the Stars. It's out from Princeton Press. And it's by far now my best-selling book. I'm really thrilled to say it's been translated into 7 languages. And the Japanese edition is on its way to me as we speak. I got an email from my publisher today saying it would be, oh, he's got the book. Thank you. I didn't think to bring a copy. You're the guy who bought it.
It's a great book.
Well, thank you. It's written for the layperson, the non-expert, I should say, not necessarily layperson. I also write science fiction, and my next novel is coming out from Baen in November in hardcover. My co-author, Travis Taylor, and I are writing a 3-book series called the Orion's Arm series. The first book was Saving Proxima, and the book that will be out in November is book 2, and it's called Crisis at Proxima. So I hope you all enjoy it.
All right, Jan?
Okay, hello everyone, and good morning, as it's 2 a.m. for me here in Prague. My name is Jan Kotouc, and I'm a writer of military science fiction space operas, usually far future, and because I don't want to see the time when I know I've been wrong in my predictions. So I'm doing like 700 plus years in the future, so I know I'll be safely dead by then. And I also write alternative history, which in Czech language is my most successful series, which is called The Czech Lands. And some of my books have been translated into English, which is the Central Imperium series. The first book in the old edition looks like this. I haven't got the newest edition, but the picture is...
Oh, no. He dropped out from us again. Oh, we keep losing him. We were losing him in the chat earlier. I'll add him back whenever he reconnects.
The alternate history must have grabbed him for a
Yeah.
reality.
The timeline needed correcting. There he is.
I'm just going to keep re-adding you as long as you want to come back. So.
Yeah, so sorry about that. So what have I missed? What was the last thing?
Oh, you were just finishing up your description, your bio and books.
Yeah, so as I said, my books is like Empires Rising and Falling, Far Future, stuff going boom in space, and there are bunnies because I figure out what kind of pet should the main hero has on a spaceship, and the answer was, well, bunnies, and I used to be a bunny owner as well, so yeah, bunnies. And right now, one of my works in progress is that I work with David Weber and Tom Pope on the Honor Harrington novel, not the main line, but a story in the Honor Harrington universe.
And Michael.
Okay, well, I started out as a space scientist, but life had other ideas. Got my bachelor's degree in astrophysics. Then I joined the Air Force. Did 20 years as an Air Force Space Operations Officer. Along the way, got a master's degree in space studies, but never once touched the science. They had me doing plenty of other things. So when I retired, I went back to work as a civilian now for the Space Force, and still doing space operations stuff. No space science, but I could talk a good game. I write military science fiction and fantasy. My first book, Silent Violence, is about Marines in space, like actual Marines who do spaceship boarding actions and things like that. Then I ventured into ventured into the Four Horsemen universe, Thicker Than Water. And for my next book, I'm trying out the lit RPG realm, writing for Three Ravens in the Car Wars universe, as well as planning the follow-on to Thicker Than Water.
Oh, you're done. Okay. Sorry. I lose track of when people are finished speaking. Anyway, so now, thank you for introducing yourselves, everybody. And thank you, Jan, for staying up for crazy hours. And thank you, Les, for coming even though you're sick. This panel
yeah,
has taken
if you
some
see me
dedication.
drinking my hot tea, it's to soothe my everything.
All right. Well, we are going to go into my questions now. And of course, viewers, if you have any questions for our various space scientists and or space affiliates, feel free to put them in the chat and I will ask them. My first question, though, is incredibly stupid and actually the question that I created this panel for. So bear with me for a second. So several years ago, I want to say it was around 2020, Coca-Cola released a flavor of Coke called Starlight Coke that they advertised as space flavored. And I want to know, first off, did you try it? And was the flavor accurate? Like, what does space taste like? Or what is it supposed to taste like? Is there any way of knowing?
Supposedly it smells like a combination of gunpowder and burnt radiator fluid. So
yeah, I suppose you could find out what space tastes like once. And then
you're
done.
dead.
Yeah. You might be able to record a quick message as to what it tastes like, but
yeah.
No. On the other hand, if you want to know what it tastes like to live in space, it's basically a locker room. Mm-hmm. That's what the astronauts have described the ISS as being like.
And I remember that the astronauts living on ISS reported that their taste buds get like different, so they don't have such a profound sense of taste, so they put lots of spices on their food to feel it.
Yeah.
Huh. What is it about the space environment that causes taste buds to become less sensitive?
Well, it's not the taste buds. So when you're in microgravity, your fluids equalize throughout your body.
Oh.
And so your head basically gets all stuffed up.
Mm-hmm.
You have like the effects of having a cold without actually having a cold. So.
Oh, makes sense.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Mm-hmm. But how about you, Les and Patrick?
I was going to say exactly what Michael said, that the fluid imbalance, or excuse me, rebalance. Yeah, it's like having a head cold. As I said, I don't have a space science background. I do have a lot of connections and a lot of curiosity. Someone that graduated a few years after me from college, went on to become an astronaut, and reached out to him a few times for background research, run some things by him to get a sense of, okay, is this realistic? Is this how this would work? Things like that. So it was a fountain of information. Someone else I was in the Marines with went on to be an astronaut, and I haven't been in touch with him since, but I definitely got to know the personality type, and that's helped a lot with writing. But I think I'm getting off track from what space Coke might taste like.
I can't say that I tried it, but you're talking to someone who's maybe had 2 Cokes or sodas in the last 25 years. My daughter was 3 years old when she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes.
Oh.
And we had to start figuring out how many carbohydrates are in everything. And when I realized that a can of Coke or Pepsi has the equivalent of 20 sugar cubes in it.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's when I decided I'm not drinking this stuff anymore. Yeah. So I gave it up.
Oh, no. John left us again. We'll get him back.
That doggone alternative timeline.
There he is. You're back. You haven't missed anything. We were about to go on to my first question.
I just wanted to add one thing, if I may. Oh, yeah, I just remember about what space tastes like. I remember in one of my books, I decided to have a space whiskey, that's created on the moon, on the lunar surface under a dome. And I asked important question: can you actually do that? Can you make whiskey in the dome? For whiskey, you need barley, yeast, and water. So the question is, under a dome, you can do it. Question is, why would you? And because it's science fiction, I can say, why not? It's expensive as hell, but people can have it, so.
Well, an interesting side note to that is we spent a week doing the Bourbon Trail in Kentucky about a month and a half ago. So I've learned about all I care to learn about the whole distillation and fermentation process.
Hey, I want to interject one more thing. I thought I remembered it, and I just confirmed it. I heard a lecture from many years ago when the Apollo astronauts came to the Marshall Space Flight Center, and they were talking about their time on the moon. I can't tell you what it tasted like, but they said that the lunar dust that got in the lunar module smelled like gunpowder, like spent gunpowder. So that, and I suspect if it smelled like that, it might have had a little bit of an aftertaste like you might get from something like that.
Yeah,
probably so. All right. Some of you have already answered some of this question, but my second question was going to be, what's your background or specialty in space science, and how long have you been working in your field? We touched on backgrounds, but how long have you guys been working in your fields or researching them in Patrick's case? We'll start with Jan.
Okay, so I missed that part in my introduction because the connection broke, but okay, I don't have background in science or anything. My degree is from communications and basically marketing, which I studied and learned that I would rather die than do it for a living, but I use it secondarily as promoting my books and so on. I had a very short career in logistics, and I actually use that a lot in my writing because every now and then I have a container ship in space, and in the Honorverse novel we are writing right now, we have designs of container ships and how big they are and what are the standard sizes of containers in the Honorverse. It's all wonderful stuff, and Tom Pope has spent several pages writing about that stuff alone. And so I think that all of these things influenced me. I also been teaching English in companies, English as a second language, and some of my characters are teachers, so that influenced me. But as for background in science, I know very little about science by myself, so I do lots of research, as Patrick said, and I also have a team of advisors, and I've trained them, and I learned how to communicate with advisors because, they're really happy to talk to you because most experts in various fields, they are very lonely and no one appreciates them, and nothing opens so many doors as a sentence, "Hello, I'm a writer and I'm doing research." Everyone wants to talk to you. And the second thing is that you need to ask questions in a very specific way. That's what I learned. And you cannot ask too many open-ended questions because you may get lots of very accurate information that are useless to what you're writing. So usually what I do my own research as best as I can, then I write it as best as I can, then I show it to the experts and say, "Hey, this is what I've done. Is this accurate?" Right. And they say, "Yeah, change this, change that, this is okay." and that's actually the best approach. And sometimes I have to like modify what they tell me because the story needs something, and but I try not to do that very often. But since I'm writing far future stuff, most of the time I can make things up more easily than like near future stuff can.
Michael, you went into some detail on your background, but did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, the 22nd of June this year marks 30 years since I started down that path in the Air Force. I learned a lot of things related to space, how radars operate and track objects in space, to satellite ground systems and how they communicate up into the sky. So, I'm pretty glad that I took the career path that I did. It was primarily I joined the Air Force because my junior year in college, I'm researching what does an astrophysicist do. Turns out once you get your bachelor's degree, you're stuck on a mountaintop somewhere in an observatory. You're taking observations from some doctor who's writing his own research paper while you're doing your graduate work to get your PhD, and you're hoping that you've done a good enough job that he mentions you in his paper. And I'm like, that's not the life I want. I want to actually be doing something. So that's why I joined the Air Force, but it's been a good ride.
Mm-hmm. And Les, did you have anything you wanted to add for your background?
Yeah, your question scared me because I had to do the math. I've been at NASA for 34 years. You can tell. That's why I'm follically challenged. But then if you count the 3 years prior to that I worked for a defense contractor on Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, working on space-based lasers and particle beams, then it gets 37 years. But my graduate research was related to a problem they had on the shuttle. So I guess you have to count that. And once I add in all the science fiction I started reading when I was 12 to prepare myself for this field, I guess I've been either training or in the field for 50 years.
Wow.
But that includes the science fiction prep that I had starting when I was about 12 years old. But professionally, I would say 37 years.
Cool. And Patrick, you're the researcher, but how long have you been researching space to this extent? Because your research is incredible. Like Jacob was literally, when he was working on one of his books a few years ago, he literally told me he wanted you to read over it to check the accuracy of the space science. And I think that's about the time we learned that, oh, you just research really well. You haven't worked in it. So how long have you been researching that intensely?
Well, I was told there would be no math.
Oh, no. Make up a number. I won't notice.
Oh, honestly, most of
you fooled her so far.
Really, it's been an obsession since I was about 5 years old, and that was 1969, and we all know what happened in 1969. Unless you want me to rattle off, what Led Zeppelin 1 or. I can go down that road too, real easy. No, I've always been really obsessed with airplanes and rocketry and space travel. So naturally, I majored in English in college. Go figure. But no, I vividly remember it. My grandfather followed this stuff really closely, and he had a couple of books that when I was a little kid, I just kept pouring through them. I couldn't tear myself away from them because the stuff looked so cool. And then I remember seeing a Gemini launch on TV. I would have been like 3 years old then, even if that, maybe it was a rerun. But no, I knew what they were doing with the Apollo program, and I followed it as closely as a 5-year-old could, and never really let go of me. So I was a big science fiction fan. I was into astronomy, still am, into model rocketry, still am. And so a lot of the research that I do for books is just stuff that I do naturally out of interest. And, it started with wanting to know, the history of the space program and, fundamentals of astronomy. Then as I got older and got better at math, um, digging into digging into the technicalities behind all of it. I really wanted to understand how all this stuff worked. And when I decided to start writing stories about it, I had to understand how all this stuff worked.
Right.
Because typically my head is not really into far future sci-fi. I always tell people it's more like The Martian than Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's the kind of stuff I'm going to write, I better get it correct, because I always say my number one goal is to not get laughed out of the room by the people who really know what they're talking about.
Right.
People like Les and Michael. So yeah, a lot of it is just comes out of natural interest. It's not really work to me, but when I sit down to write a new story, I really have to understand the technology that propels it. Because again, I write it kind of from a techno thriller frame of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing I always say is not just understanding the technology, but trying to understand the ways it can go wrong, because that's the thing that'll make the story interesting. So
that's actually a really good lead in to two questions we have from Glenn in the chat. So the first one is, I'm going to put it up on the comments here on the screen. Do you write science to be understandable, or do you write science as you know it and just hope the readers get it? How do you balance how much detail you put in with simplicity so that people can understand it easily? And let's start with Jan.
Okay, well, it's me. I don't understand it that much myself. So whatever the experts tell me, they tell me in a language that I understand. So I try to then say the same way. And what I try to avoid in the story is having a stupid character that someone needs to explain it to. Sometimes it happens because sometimes there are stupid people that are important for the story.
You need them. Sometimes you need them.
You need them, yes, sometimes. But I try to avoid it. As you know perfectly well, Bob, This is how our FTL drive works. I try to avoid that. But usually, the people who explain the science to me, they need to use small words, so I use small words as well.
Michael?
So I spent a lot of my military career working as a staff officer. And a big part of a staff officer's job is prepping his boss for, whatever meeting is coming up. So you have to be able to distill highly complex or highly technical subjects into something that basically fits on one piece of paper. And your boss is probably only going to have like 20, 30 minutes to read that and learn enough of it that they can talk about it. So I grew up, learning to write very, not simplistically, but basically, right? Trying to take something down to its most fundamental facts, what's important to get across. There's plenty of sci-fi authors out there who they are good at the prose, right? And they can write, and they can take a simple sentence and expand it into a whole paragraph. But for me, that's not what I've learned. So I always try and write science to be understandable. If it's not necessary to talk about a particular aspect of it, then I'll leave it out of the writing, or maybe I'll put it somewhere else where it doesn't interrupt the flow of the story.
Les, how about you?
Well, I tell you, sometimes you have to put an info dump in, but I try to avoid it. If I'm writing well, the science fits kind of seamlessly with the plot, and the story is revolving around the characters interacting with that science or enabled by that science. But sometimes it's inevitable that you have to get into a little bit more detail. And Bayan, in my novel Mission to Metheny, actually let me put a little 5-page appendix that was the science behind the fiction. So in the story, I had the interstellar drive, and at first glance, you would think, hey, that violates physics, doesn't it, Les? Well, no, it doesn't. There's something in quantum physics that might let you do this, and I have it in the back of the book, right? I didn't say that in the prose, but anybody who looked at the table of contents would have seen, kind of the science behind the fiction. Now, I have had to put data dumps in, and when I do that, I want to make it, to answer your Glenn's question, I want to write it so people understand it, not so that I hope they get it, because I can't assume that that I'm explaining it necessarily at a level that I hope people can go look it up. And if they do, they're not reading the book, they're referencing something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to make it so that the science interrupts the flow of the story.
Patrick, you kind of already answered this one, but again, did you have anything you wanted to add?
You know, I approach it kind of the same way Michael does. Actually got my start with writing and not preparing staff officer briefings or anything like that. But my day job's in the aviation industry, and that's been my career for the last 30 years. And I've been in progressively more technical jobs. And at one point, I like to say I Forrest Gumped my way into an engineering job. and that was kind of the springboard to writing the kind of stuff I wanted to do, because I finally had a foundation for it that I could build on. But I was writing for an industry magazine, and I was writing on some technical and or complicated subjects, because to no one, maybe to anyone's surprise, not everybody in the aviation business is an expert on everything. And there are a lot of concepts that are misunderstood by people who you think would understand them. But it's just, there's a lot to know and a lot to keep up with. And so it was kind of the same thing Michael was doing. I was taking these different concepts that I was deeply involved in through my job, and getting the important parts and distilling it in, learning to communicate with people, knowing the audience, and getting the important points across that maybe they overlook. They take certain things for granted, and they just weren't so. And it was a real challenge to lead people from one frame of thinking about a certain topic into a different frame of thinking about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe long-winded, but.
Glenn had another good question, which is, when are you able to take liberties with science? Do you cheat the science to make a plot happen? Do you ever tweak it, or do you try to be as accurate as possible? How do you approach that? Patrick?
Well, there's that rule of thumb. You get one cheat, one hand wavium. And even at that, you better make it sound good. The Martian is a really good example. The inciting incident that sets off the whole chain of events is the big sandstorm, and the reality is a 200 mile per hour wind, on a planet where the atmospheric pressure is a small fraction of what it is here, just doesn't have a lot of effect. There's just not that much air moving. So, and Andy Weir confesses, yeah, he knew that, but he needed it to make the story work. He needed something, and that was the something. So
let's do Michael.
So far, I haven't had to cheat the science to make a plot work. We made several preconceived basics about science to underpin the whole book. Like, for example, in both of these books, you've got highly advanced battery technology that has 100 times the storage that we have today, and you have lasers that are weapons grade that are small enough for a person to carry. So I haven't had to cheat the science to make the plot work, but I have taken advantage of the fact that science and engineering are very complex and they break, and that can move the plot forward. So sometimes, well, not yet, but I could see cheating to break something to make move the plot ahead, right? Because you need to put your hero in a situation where they have to face insurmountable odds in order to move the story along. But so that's where I think I would look at cheating science, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Jan, how about you?
Well, it's a question of whether it counts as cheating or simply not explaining it. But in my far future space operas, I, for example, have these aliens that have these FTL gates, like giant warp gates that propels us instantly from place to place, and they need neurological material for that, and for that they need to harvest brains from like 2 million people, and so you need 4 million for 2 gates. And I don't explain that, and the aliens are not that keen to explaining that to humans. They just need the brains, and of course, so I use that to explore the moral dilemma. Like, can we create our interstellar travel by basically murdering 4 million people for each bridge? And that's what I do. And this, as David Drake used to say, I'm a concept kind of guy. I leave engineering to the people living in that world.
Les?
No, I don't cheat the science, but I will cheat the engineering. Because, as long as it's physically possible, I'm going to assume somebody someday, some bright people or team of people are going to figure it out. Mm-hmm. And so as long as, what is it, Scotty, I cannot change the laws of physics, Captain, right? Well, as a writer, I can't change the laws of physics, but boy, I can make up the engineering. And some of the people who've worked with me at NASA when I'm leading a project are probably wondering, yeah, you do that at work too. You expect us to just create things, and most of the time they do. So I've been very fortunate.
All right. My next question is, okay, so we live in a really interesting era for space technology. Like, it fascinates me that every now and then SpaceX can do a launch, and it's so common that I can be like, oh, there's another space launch happening, and just kind of, it's just a common thing. My question is, either in your field or just in general, things you're fascinated by, what's been the wildest or most exciting development in space technology for you we could say over the course of your career or within the past decade or so? Anyone want to go first?
Well, I mean, I can jump right in because I am very passionate that I believe that when the first self-sustaining lunar settlement is writing their history of how they came to cut their dependency upon Earth, the first technology they're going to cite that allowed it to happen was the invention of rockets. The second technology that allowed it to happen is additive manufacturing and 3D printing. Mm-hmm. Because that's what's going to allow us to become independent wherever we are when we can make our own resources easily without having to bring spares. Right. So I would say that is one technology that has radically changed the rocket business. A lot of companies now are 3D printing their rocket engines. Wow. We've got a new kind of rocket engine we're developing that 20 years ago would have been impossible because the materials didn't exist and you had to build the parts to set fine specifications. You couldn't do it. We're doing it today. So I would say additive manufacturing. And the third thing, which really did revolutionize space, was the invention of the small satellites, which is what Elon Musk launches a lot of. And the invention that enabled that was not in space. It was right here. So the miniaturized electronics and the electronics revolution has decreased the size and mass of spacecraft, which is what allows Starlink and all the neat science missions that we see happening today to launch in much smaller spacecraft. I would say those are the inventions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For me, I'd say it's the reusability factor and how that's driving down the cost of getting mass into orbit. And, it's something that I've waited my whole life to see. And I've just been so excited to watch it happen, and I love that it's becoming routine because that's, speaking for myself, that's, the frame of mind that I write from is, what will it look like when this stuff becomes more routine? And, like I may not know the space business, but I know the aviation business pretty well. And so what I did, was kind of take that experience and extrapolate it into the world that I wanted to see. And I want to see more competition. SpaceX is doing fantastic. I'm disappointed that Blue Origin hasn't been keeping up. We'll see if they get New Glenn flying like they think they're going to here within the next few months. But yeah, I want to see more competition and more inventiveness, and I would really like to see NASA get back more into the R&D function and not the operational function. And Les, I don't know how you feel about it working for them, but I would really like to see, them develop into more advanced propulsion and long duration life support. Those kind of enabling technologies, so private industry can take that and run with it. So.
Remember, you're talking to the chief technologist at Marshall, and that's exactly what I'm trying to get us to do.
Yeah.
So you and I are on the same page. You got to come work with me.
Yeah. Well, Michael Collins is the one that said the space program needed more English majors. So I'm right here, man.
Yes. We have some right here. How about you, Jan?
I agree with both of you, and especially like what Patrick said about how it's like happening more and it's more exciting again. And I think that's the thing, that it's like more interesting for the common Joe. Maybe that's me speaking as a marketing person, but people are interested, and there haven't been interested for a long time like this. Maybe it's the billionaire space race, or maybe just because also China is also more interested in space as well. It's all together, and and the reuse of that, because I think when space shuttle started, there was this idea that actually, at least Dick Slayton says so in his book, that the idea was that there would be new shuttle flight like once every 2 weeks. Of course, it didn't happen like that because the reusability was not all that good. You still needed some parts that were just for one-off, and two, there was no need to send a shuttle to space every 2 weeks. There was no real reason to do that in the late 70s and 80s and 90s. So, and I think this is exciting. And of course, thing that I would love, maybe because I would prefer to be there, is like artificial gravity using some centrifuge. We know it's like possible at some point. So let's just do it, because I like walking. I would like to go to space, but I like walking.
Mm-hmm. Michael?
Well, yeah, Les and Patrick stole the best ones. So I had to dig deep and think, and it's not so much a specific technology, I guess, that I would say. Certainly something that really impressed me was when National Space Policy Directive 3 was signed, which was about commercial space activities. And very specifically, it talked about what's called space traffic management, which basically tried to is putting space operations, space flight on the same page as air traffic control, which in turn means that it is becoming commonplace. And then, it goes back to what you said initially, right? Oh, look, it's Friday. It must be another SpaceX launch, right? Or there's plenty of people now who have gotten tired of posting pictures of the launches, right? It's like it's the same thing over and over again. And that's kind of in direct contravention, right, to the earliest days of the space race, right? No Buck Rogers, no bucks. Nowadays, the bucks are there, and they're going after them, and it's to the point where actually the federal government, one of the slowest agencies in the world, has had to acknowledge that they need a new way to manage spaceflight, and they need to establish a traffic management operation that says this is how we're going to control all these flights going up and down from the Earth to the orbit and back and forth. And it's so in my mind, that's an evolutionary leap that we needed to take. It had to become commonplace in our heads that space travel was going to be commonplace.
That's a really good point, because it is becoming more and more of an issue down in Florida, because that's already pretty constricted airspace. And there's a lot of travel back and forth, and weather alone can throw things into chaos. But then when you've got all of the Eastern Florida airways that are shut down because of a space launch and recovery, and those windows can last for a couple hours. I know they're trying to tighten them up and have fewer time constraints, but yeah, it just it throws everything into a mess. Everything going down to Florida from one side of the country goes down the east. Everything coming from west of the Mississippi goes down the west side. Everything leaving Florida goes up the center. And so, yeah, it doesn't take a lot to really mess that up. And, if this is going to become as routine as Musk and the others want to make it, we've got to find a better way to integrate that.
And even before NSPD3 was signed, the number of companies, the number of states that were putting money and effort into building a quote spaceport in their state was increasing by the week. Now, a lot of that, they've come to realize, we don't have a good flight path, or there's too many houses along where we would want to fly. But I mean, who would have thought back in the 60s and the 70s that we would have a launch facility at Boca Chica, right? I don't think anybody would have told you that. I think they were just surprised that we were able to get one out on the west coast of Vandenberg. So you're right, Patrick. We definitely need more spaceports to accommodate the regularity of flight.
It is a good problem to have.
That's where I'm going to have to interrupt, though, because I think the people who knew we were going to have them in places like Boca Chica and Arizona were the science fiction readers, right? Because I was assuming that this day was going to come by the year 2000.
I was talking about the normies.
Oh, okay. All right.
The people who make policy.
Yeah. All right. Because I for one, I'm like most of y'all. I just assumed we'd be where we are today 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That leads me to another question. How much did science fiction influence your interest in this field as opposed to just the basic science of it? Patrick, we'll start with you first. Was there a particular work of science fiction?
You know what? Not really. I was more into the nonfiction. I was actually, one of the things that got me to start writing was I couldn't find enough science fiction that was the kind of science fiction that I wanted to read. Mm-hmm. Ben Bova did a lot, but it was that kind of gritty near future stuff I was having trouble finding. And so I decided I'm just going to do it myself. If nobody else is telling the stories I want to read, somebody's got to do it.
How about you, Jan?
Well, as I said, I'm not really in any science field, but I always liked science fiction since childhood, since as far as I can remember. Of course, I remember watching the first Star Wars movie for the first time, and you see the Star Destroyer at the beginning, and that's it. I actually, given my age, I actually watched Spaceballs first, then I watched Star Wars.
Spaceballs is superior.
Some would say you had the better priorities.
yeah, well, probably. And it was available. It was in stock in the video rental store near my house. So yeah. But,
they're making a sequel, right?
Are they really?
Yeah, no kidding. The Schwartz Awakens.
Talking about that for 2 decades, I think now. And Mel Brooks is like 90 something or something.
Yeah, maybe his last movie.
Yeah, well, of course, Clint Eastwood just finished his last movie and he's 94, and Francis Ford Coppola is something like that, and he's done his last movie. But anyway, what was the question again? Oh yeah, the field, choosing the field. Well, I think I've been more interested in writing and telling stories. That's maybe why I studied communication, and of course, communication is also an interesting field. And of course, in science fiction, there is always question of communication, whether we have Ansibles and FTL communication, or we just need to send a dispatch boat or something like that. And I think I even used my little experience in logistics, not only building fictional spaceships holding containers, but just how it looks like. I remember one early Star Trek episode, either TNG or Deep Space Nine, and we see people loading a cargo ship, and we see 2 dudes carrying a box somewhere. And then if you look at big port cities like Rotterdam and see all the bus going there, I want to see that in science fiction environment. I don't want to see 2 aliens holding a box. I want to see tens of thousands of containers being hauled within minutes by giant cranes, which is what happens in modern ports now. So it would happen on a giant space station at some point in the future.
Mhm.
You know, and so that's what I try to do in the books as well.
Michael?
So my biggest reading when I was younger was military history. Still a huge military history buff, but that's where I started reading. As a matter of fact, my teachers were worried because I was 8 years old. I'm reading stuff that you find in a high school library. But then I found an interesting book, series of books, Tom Swift. Which, if you're not familiar with that, he is the kid scientist, the genius type, right? And he and his dad go on all kinds of adventures, and they've got their friends and everything. And so that was kind of cool, yeah. But that was really, a lot of hand waving, right? There was some basics of science in there, but it was more about the adventures than about the science,
right?
And then when I was let's see here, this is 11 years old. At a bookstore in Germany, my dad was stationed overseas. I found Starship Troopers.
Ah.
This is the very same book that I found all those years ago. As you can see, it's had better days. But this was my gateway into true science fiction. And I'd never heard of any of these others, right? I haven't been over in Europe and not exposed to all the American stuff, only that small amount that they could get on base.
Mm-hmm.
So once I figured out that Robert Heinlein was, in fact, a master of science fiction, I went about trying to find everything that I could. And if I couldn't find it, pestering my parents to take me someplace where I could find it. So that has been my biggest influence, not just because of the science, but because of how he wrote it, right? Mm-hmm. And the questions of why we fight and why we expand throughout the universe, why we have this soul of discovery within us.
Les, how about you?
Well, I mentioned I was 12, and if I'd had forewarning, I would have the actual paperback that I read when I was 12. Perry Rhodan series, which was a kind of a pulpish science fiction series translated from German into English back in the day. And I read Perry Rhodan number 33, Realm of the Triplanets, and I was hooked, right? And then my sister found copies of the James Blish novelizations of Star Trek episodes, which I read before I actually watched Star Trek, because they were not in rerun in my little town with the 3 TV channels we had at the time. So I was all familiar with Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock and how the plot went before I actually saw some of those shows. But no, science fiction framed everything. I was 7 when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, and that got me interested. And then, man, when I read those science fiction books, I wanted to build the Enterprise. So, or if you're a Perry Rhodan fan, the Drusus, I think, was the name of the ship back in the day, DRUSUS. I'll have to look it up and see. But no, I was hooked, and I read everything I could get from that point forward.
So I got to jump back in here because Michael inspired me with his. I mentioned when I was 4 or 5 years old at my grandparents' house in Spartanburg, and pouring through my grandpa's books. There was one in particular that I could never let go of when I was there. And just a few months ago, my mother-in-law found a copy at a yard sale. And, this is it. We came in peace. I was obsessed with this book when I was 5 years old. And she had no idea. She just picked it up and thought, oh, Pat might like this, for collector's item. And, they came to visit us one weekend and asked me if I wanted it. And I about cried.
Yeah.
Seriously. I mean, talking about going into the Wayback Machine, this really did it. But yeah, this is the book that started it all for me.
All right, getting close to the top of the hour, so I'm going to close us out with another fun question. But again, viewers, if you have any questions too, feel free to put them in the chat. We've got a few minutes left. Now, books, movies, entertainment in general, they frequently get space physics wrong. what's the most infuriating mistake you've ever seen? And on the flip side, which titles, especially movies, depict space physics most accurately to you? Les, do you want to start us off?
Wow. Okay.
I feel like this could almost be a panel in itself.
It could be a panel in itself. I'll tell you what I had learned a long time ago when I go see a quote science fiction movie at the theater or on TV or wherever it is. I have to turn part of my brain off and not be too critical when I can. If it's egregious, I can't help it. And so most science fiction movies, almost all of them, get something wrong, right? And I'm sure they get more wrong than I catch. But I can put up with it if it's a good plot and a good story. And I can also put up with it if it's just being played, like Star Wars. Star Wars makes no pretense about being science fiction. It's space opera, right? And that's a different subgenre, so I don't care. I hear the ship go by in space. That doesn't bother me, right? But if they're really trying to treat it seriously, and they make claims that it's science fiction at its best, and all these other things, and they get it really bad, then I get really upset. And I would think the winner of the last 20 years for that is Gravity. And what Gravity got wrong about orbital mechanics and where the Hubble is and the space station and how things move in space and all this other stuff, I just, at the end of the movie, I could barely remember the plot because there was so much wrong with it. And they tried to take it seriously, or they wanted you to think they were. Yeah. And it was just bad. Okay.
But just quickly interject, if I can now just quickly interject, I remember the best plot synopsis of Gravity is that George Clooney would rather die than spend 1 hour with a woman his own age. Sorry, please continue. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I won't comment on George Clooney's proclivities. Now, a movie, though, that people were surprised that I really liked, and even though it was kind of ridiculous, was Passengers, about the interstellar voyage, because it was a wonderful love story. And at first, unrequited love, and then what do you do for love and forgiveness, and this whole notion of a future in uncertain times. So I was just able to put all of the science they got wrong on the side because it was such a wonderful human story. Okay. So I'm a little bit more flexible, I think, than people would expect.
How about you, Michael?
Oh, God. So I will give the default answer. There's no yanking and banking in space. Star Wars and all those others looking at you. Right. The guys who get it right, The Expanse, Babylon 5, if you're familiar with that show.
I love Babylon 5.
And Space Above and Beyond. At least they got the physics of it right.
I remember that show.
The pilots as infantrymen was really killing me, but okay.
Yeah, and
fine.
no
We can't have
command whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
yeah.
now hang on. They were Space Marines, right?
Yeah, and
there you go.
A Harrier pilot is not going to land his aircraft on the battlefield, get out and with a M4 and start firing away.
Oh, okay, well, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But
I had forgotten about that show. I really enjoyed that, but
that was a good show,
right?
Yeah, that was one you just turn your brain off and enjoy the show. I tell you what I really like, even though they played fast and loose with the rules because they probably didn't understand them very well at the time, is a lot of the old 50s sci-fi shows.
Oh yeah.
Forbidden Planet, the classic, right? That's one of my absolute favorites to watch. Just the possibilities of storytelling with that left behind civilization. And the whole, everything that they did with space travel was predicated on what they knew, which is basically ocean travel with a little bit of air travel mixed in. But I thought that was really, really an interesting take. And as we're learning, it's actually probably a little bit more applicable to how we're going to go to Mars and some of the outer planets. Although for those of you in the audience who are still bitter that the Navy did not take over the Space Force, I will let you know that they could not wait to divest themselves of their space assets quick enough to the Space Force because it wasn't a capital ship. So anyway, that's my rant on that. But Yeah, so those 50 sci-fi movies were another source of inspiration for me in terms of writing science fiction, trying to get back some of that first time discovery, that explorers into the unknown, those brave men and women who, they knew there's dangers out there, but in the name of exploration and of science, they went out there.
Mm-hmm. Jan, how about you?
Well, Michael already mentioned, I think the good one, really good space science is in The Expanse. I really like Expanse. It's very well done. As for the bad stuff, as Les said, I try to turn my brain off and just be entertained. And I also love lots of animes, Japanese anime, and you have to turn your brain super well.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You have to turn the physics brain off.
Do that, so
just for the hair alone.
Yeah. But something that I've seen recently, and it's totally ridiculous, and I know it doesn't pretend to be serious science fiction, was Rebel Moon. It was just so stupid on every conceivable level, and especially in the one thing that is really ridiculous is the farming community, which is like robots and like automatic doors in their cottages, but they don't have harvesters or combines or whatever you call it. Just they use it by hand, and there are some neo-Luddites people who want to be connected with nature, but they apparently don't mind robots and automatic door. They just want to collect their barley or whatever that was. And another thing was that there's this bad guy, evil space battleship, and they go to the engine room, and it's a huge pile of coal. And they're dudes with shovels, and they shove the coal into the reactor or something like that. And that's totally ridiculous.
Wow.
Suspending disbelief is well and good, but not that much.
Yeah, I love things that require me to suspend disbelief, and I don't think I actually finished Rebel Moon. I think I watched maybe 10 minutes and got bored.
I heard it was pretty awful. Yeah.
I don't remember finishing it. I remember starting it, but I turned it off.
Yeah.
I haven't watched it, and I'm going to make a note to never watch it.
Patrick, how about you? Have you already gone for this question?
I haven't, and I'm amazed that for bad science that nobody has mentioned Armageddon yet.
Oh yeah.
Oh, because you know what?
So
Come on,
fun,
Bruce
though.
Willis.
I know, but not even
That's-
Bruce Willis. I get it. Michael Bay. It's all noise and explosions, and everything looks
fun.
like an MTV, music video. But yeah, I watched it, and I was just, my jaw dropped. I was just like, this is so bad on so many levels, and not even a pretense of trying to get any of the science right, other than, yes, it would be really bad for a big asteroid to hit Earth.
Now, on the other hand, its counterpart show, Deep Impact.
That was good.
Yeah,
that was really good.
That that did get a lot right, didn't it?
It did.
Right, and I mean, and to me, that one of the most classic lines that a hero can say came from Deep Impact is, "Well, at least we'll all have high schools named after us."
Oh, that's a great line.
Yeah.
You know what? And that is the kind of thing. Back to personality types. That's the kind of thing that one of those guys would say, isn't it? That kind of that gallows humor that comes from the military and having a job that's really freaking dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got two good questions in the comments, and then I will close us out. Glenn is back and asks, are any of you tempted to write in genres outside science fiction?
I already am. Like I said, I'm writing Car Wars, which is, that's not quite post-apocalyptic, but it's kind of apocalyptic. And I've written fantasy short stories. I'm working on other fantasy stuff as well. So yeah, multi-genre.
Mm-hmm. Jan, are you primarily science fiction, or have you written?
As I mentioned, my best-selling series in Czech language is Alternative History, which is like
yes, that's right.
The Czech lands. It's alternative 1940s, so Czech-Slovak kingdom fighting it off with the Tsarist Russia on the high seas. So it's like Battle of Midway, slightly altered, and and right now I'm writing a prequel with a co-writer with that, which is 1848. So we have suddenly muskets and horses and square formations and stuff like that. So that's my military history passion. And I also know that at one point I want to write like a espionage thriller or espionage thriller series, which I have done like whenever I have time, which will not be for the next several years, but well, I plan to keep doing this. So,
How about you, Les? Have you written outside science fiction?
Well, of course, I write my popular science books. Traveler's Guide to the Stars that Patrick put up is my most recent. Wrote a book about that new wonder material called graphene that was published a few years ago, and there might be a second edition of that coming out soon. And I'm working on another nonfiction book for Princeton Press, which I'm real excited about. It's how space can help solve energy and environment problems here on Earth. And that'll be out sometime about this time in 2025 from Princeton Press.
And Patrick.
Right now, I just turned in the second Interstellar Medic book last week, and I'm developing a sequel to Escape Orbit. After that, I do have more of a traditional thriller that's kind of rolling around in the mental hopper right now, has been for a long time. And this would actually play more into the real world things that I actually have direct experience in. And it would be more of a thriller, and that's about all I can say because I have not developed the story enough. I know the inciting incident. It's really cool, and I really want to write it, but where it goes from there, I've still got a lot of work to do on it.
All right. Michael Loudermilk actually has a really good question to close us out with, and I'm going to show it here. He says, I remember John Clynn's 1962 orbit being played live on a radio report on the school announcement system. I never would have guessed we would fly a helicopter on Mars. What do you think will be the next big thing? Who wants to take that one?
Colony on Mars.
Mm-hmm.
Elon Musk said he's going to do it, and I do not doubt that man will try his darndest to get that going. So
I think he's crazy, but he's this.
He's a good crazy. He's our crazy. Really, once Starship gets, and assuming that it all works, which oh my gosh, it just seems like such a big leap, but. Once Starship is operational and we're sending something, with the capacity of almost a 747 into orbit, and it's reusable and it drives down the cost for getting stuff. I mean, it's going to break so many paradigms of what people are, used to thinking they're limited by. And Les could speak to this a lot better, than I could. But it's going to throw a lot of things that used to be limitations out the window. And that's, I think, where you're really going to see space development take off.
I would add probably also when we assemble a huge spaceship directly in space, maybe from parts, which means
and
the big
that's what I was thinking.
Stuff between Earth and Mars, and we don't need to worry about escape velocity because we will have smaller ships detached from the big one.
And to enable that, actually, I'm going to change my answer. To enable that, I think the next big thing we really need is asteroid mining. Whether we go there and send the materials back, or we fly an asteroid into lunar orbit and mine it in lunar orbit, that's going to kickstart our interplanetary transportation network.
We have some comments for Patrick in particular in the chat. We got Christopher Froeby, who says, excited about the second Interstellar Medic. My 3 girls and I loved the first one. So wanted to make sure you spotted that.
I'm glad you guys enjoyed it.
Well, we are a little past the top of the hour, so I'm going to close us out now. Everyone, if you will, go down the line. Tell us where we can find your books and what your latest thing is or what's coming out soon. And let's see, who wants to go first? Let's do Michael first.
Okay, so all my books are available on Amazon. Michael Morton. You've got Silent Violence as the first one, and Thicker Than Water is the second one. A bunch of short stories with various publishers. Three Ravens, Cannon, Raconteur. And then my Car Wars book, I'm shooting for this fall to have that out. And that'll be the first of a trilogy. And then I will, I'm in the planning stages for the second and third book for following Thicker Than Water in the Four Horsemen universe.
Jan?
Okay, so you can find my stuff in English on Amazon. Just type my name. I have the Central Imperium series there, which is 4 books. It's finished, as in like you don't finish the 4th book and wonder, oh, what's going to happen next? It's not finished. So that's done. I have like now book 5 with short stories translated into English, which will be like tentative book 5, like stories in between. And one thing that's being translated right now by my wonderful translator, Isabel Stainsby, is my standalone near future or contemporary science fiction novel, Sternat's Effect, which is like Independence Day in the Czech Republic, basically. And that's going to come. That hopefully we will publish it next year. We will see. And another English project is my current work in progress with David Weber and Tom Pope in the Honor Harrington universe, as I mentioned. Otherwise, I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook. If you type my name, you will find me. I'm also on Instagram. I'm not on Twitter or X because I've never had a thought that I would fit in 140 characters. So no, it's not for me. It's not for me.
Patrick?
Well, I'm pretty basic in my social media handles. It's just my name at Facebook, at Twitter/X. As far as books, I mentioned the second Interstellar Medic book, The Long Way Home, was submitted last week. That'll be out the spring, summer time frame next year. And then after I'm done with edits on that, I'm getting started on the Escape Orbit sequel, the 3rd book in the Eccentric Orbit series. That'll be called Terminal Orbit. And then after that, I mentioned, I've got this thriller rolling around in my head I'm trying to develop. So that's where I am.
And Les.
Well, yeah, I've got like I mentioned at the beginning, I've got the 2nd book of the Orion's Arm series with Travis Taylor that's coming out in November, Crisis at Proxima. I have a book next year. I'm really thrilled, and I think I've told you about this, Patrick, given that you mentioned Ben Bova. When Ben died during COVID, I was contacted by the estate and the publicist asked if I'd like to finish his series, his Grand Tour series. So it'll be my first book from Tor Books next year, which will be completing Ben's last novel. So I'm hoping I don't make all of his fans mad. So Patrick, I hope I channeled him well enough. I've known him. I wrote a book with him previously, and I hope I'll do honor to that. You can find me on my website, lesjohnsonauthor.com. If you go to just Les Johnson, you're going to get a guy who's expert in fly fishing. That is not me. He's also a writer and has a lot more followers than I do, I think. My books are all available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the Apple Bookstore, just about anywhere you want to go. They're in hardcover, paperback, ebook, and audiobook. So they're pretty widely available. It's on Audible and things like that.
Nice. Well, thank you everyone for joining me this evening. This has been a whole lot of fun. And thank you everyone who watched. We had a lot of good comments and questions and everything. For those who want to hear more authors talk about stuff, next Saturday at the same time at 8 p.m. Eastern, I will be chatting with a bunch of my author pals about Helldivers 2. So join us for that chaos. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. But until then, see you later.
Bye.